When was your gut instinct correct and got you out of a bad situation? Serious. Was out camping with 2 friends one time and a game warden came across our campsite about an hour after dark. This is in the middle of the mountains of Tennessee and we knew this area fairly well, including the fact that we'd never seen one of these guys just appear like this. In fact, he didn't announce himself as approaching, and had no flashlight. We just had a fire going and we heard someone approaching. We were friendly to him and he said he was just doing a patrol, but I just had a very wrong feeling about this guy. When I looked at my buddies afterwards they both shot me very concerned looks too. When we were sure he was out of earshot, we spoke briefly how we were all sure this guy wasn't right and discussed what we would quickly do. We kept the fire going that night and made sure to stay up shifts around the fire as opposed to going to our tents and hammocks. One grabbed his pistol, I had my Bowie knife, and the other kept our hatchet within grabbing distance. We set up our lanterns in a broader area so we could see further and pick different sides of the fire to sit on, keeping our eyes and ears open all night. We talked like there was nothing wrong and cut up and laughed like normal, but like hell any of us were going to bed. Throughout the whole night we heard noises and leaves shifting, nothing abnormal cause animals big and small, but we were more on edge. Sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. though we heard a different type of rustling that was more consistent with 2 sets of legs rather than 4 and it circled our area a few times, then walked off. It was that moment where every hair on your body stands up. Sure enough, a moment later, we heard louder footsteps approaching, and gosh darn, wouldn't you just know that it was that same warden guy. When he got to us he said, "Well, aren't you boys up kinda late?" We gave some bullshit excuse about all of us being insomniacs, which was pretty true for that night. He talked a bit longer and asked us how much longer we thought we'd be up, and we just said, "Till we get tired." He gave an uneasy smile and looked like he was thinking hard about something. I don't think he liked that none of us turned our backs on him or really even looked away. He told us he was gonna head back to his truck and head back down the mountain soon and for us to have a good night. We're in the middle of freaking nowhere, we would have heard any vehicle a mile away. He walked off and there was no noise near us at all. We heard more noises in the night we were suspicious of, but nothing came of it. Eventually it sounded like a 4-wheeler was driving off as sunrise was getting ready to start. The first thing we did that morning was go to the nearest ranger station we knew of and brought this guy up. Nobody named that who looked like him was employed in that county. I still get chills to this day. Edit, wording and grammar. The police knocked on my door in the middle of the night. I was awake and expecting company, so I answered it, with the security screen door closed, and there were 2 cops standing there, asking to come in and get access to my backyard because there was a prowler reported. They looked legit, and there was a late model sedan with aerials on the back parked in my driveway, with a blue and red light flashing on the dashboard. There was something a bit off about them. I can't really explain it, but something in the back of my mind was screaming at me. I asked them for their names, and told them to wait a minute while I called the station to confirm they were who they said they were. The one doing all the talking cracked the shits and tried to push the screen door open, so I slammed the wooden door closed and called the police. They disappeared and minutes later the actual, real police arrived. They left a car parked outside my house, and picked up the pair a couple of streets away while they were attempting to pull over a woman over who'd just left a service station. Not so much sixth sense as much as common sense. I was driving down the highway and the only other vehicle was a pickup truck in front of me. They had a stove/oven in the bed of the truck but the gate was down. We were driving about 50 miles per hour. I said to myself, that stove is going to fall. I got over a few lanes and slowed way down. Sure enough, just a few seconds later, they hit a tiny bump and the stove flew off to go sparking down the highway. If I hadn't moved and slowed down it would have gone through my windshield. Didn't get me out of a bad situation, but my sister. When I was 10 we were swimming at a lake with the family and some friends. Everyone was milling about the picnic table grabbing food and I just got this really weird feeling that I needed to go back to the water. I went back to the beach area, and my 6-year-old sister was drowning. She couldn't swim and had waded in too deep, and was bouncing on her tiptoes in the water, coming up just enough so her nose would get above the waterline. Her head tilted back so she could catch a breath. I walked up just as she was too tired to come up again. I ran in and snatched her up, can't explain it. I was at a concert many years ago for a band I loved. Before the concert started I made my way all the way to the front. I figured that was the best spot. But it was very crowded and I got an overwhelming feeling of imminent doom. As I made my way back through the crowd it got harder and harder as more people tried to push their way forward. Eventually I got out of the crowd and sat down on the grass with a rising sense of fear. Not 1 minute later the concert was stopped before they started carrying dead and wounded people out. Pearl Jam at Roskilde. I was riding my Ninja 250 in traffic on the roadway towards the Polypipe in Perth, West Australia. Riding in the right lane, fast lane in Australia, and the traffic in front of the Mercedes in front of me suddenly slowed. I got a bad feeling and swerved to the shoulder, something I normally wouldn't bother doing, and then slowed down. The car behind me crashed hard into the Mercedes, rendering both cars completely inoperable. It was a brand new luxury model BMW and the Mercedes was some nice AMG model. At the time the two cars were valued at around $500,000 together. Apart from the obvious physical injuries I would have sustained, I was able to avoid a massive insurance headache for being the $5,000 meat in a $500,000 car sandwich. I was walking home from school at 15 and this car had been following me for a couple blocks, so I had 911 ready to call on my cell. Guy ends up cutting me off in a parking lot and trying to force me into his car. I hit dial and told him the cops would be there any minute, and he jumped back in and drove off. I stopped walking home after that. If that ever happens again, call it in before anything even happens. Say you're being followed. In most rom-coms the guy's creepy stalking and overstepping boundaries lands him the girl. Was on vacation in Toronto, staying at a hostel. For whatever reason there were very few women staying there. I was one of only 3 or 4 women versus at least 20 men on any given night that whole trip. There was one guy who, despite being relatively attractive and friendly, just really got my hackles up. Couldn't put my finger on why, but I just did not like him and wanted nothing to do with him. I would be polite but cold to him as much as possible if he joined the group I was in, and boy did he follow me from group to group. Always talking, flirting, making innuendo. I never reciprocated in the slightest. The day before my last day there I am awoken by the sounds of a fight and several male voices yelling from inside my room. Turns out the dude was seen sneaking into my room by the girls across the hall, that I had befriended and made aware of how much I disliked this dude, who made their boyfriends come remove him as he was digging through my stuff. Police were called and he was arrested. Apparently his plan was to steal my passport and plane ticket to force me to stay in Canada, and, I imagine, this was somehow supposed to be romantic and cause me to fall in love with him. To make the plan even stupider, he wasn't even from Canada, he was from Malta. I've commented several times on this stalker incident. One day as I was leaving work, I passed a delivery driver in the hallway. In that 1 to 2 seconds, I had a really bad feeling. It put me instantly on guard. He left the building before I did and initially turned onto the road in another direction. I remained on my guard thankfully, because he attempted to follow me home. I managed to ditch him at Walmart. I knew they had a lot of cameras, and was able to make contact with a police officer in the parking lot. Please never ever go home if you confirm/suspect someone is following you. Get on the phone and to a safe place as quickly as you can. It was bad enough that he knew where I worked, even though he was removed from the route, but I can't imagine how I could have ever felt safe if he knew where I lived. My mom and I were grocery shopping and I left to go back an aisle to grab something we forgot. I was halfway down the empty aisle when an unfamiliar male voice called my name. I turned around and it was a complete stranger. I had never seen him before in my life. A small internal alarm went off. My parents were very well known in our community, so I thought maybe he was one of their friends and I didn't recognize him from that distance. However, I wasn't going to move closer to find out. Then he said, "Hey, it's Paulie. We worked at local liquor store together a few years ago." Instant panic mode. I was 16 years old. In the US, or at least in my state, you are required to be at least 19 years of age to sell and serve alcohol. There is no way I could have ever worked at a liquor store. I told him he was mistaken. He replied he couldn't be wrong because no one could forget those gorgeous dimples. That was my cue to run. I turned around and ran screaming for my mom. He started to chase me but quickly aborted and made his way to the exit as soon as I started screaming. 2 days later, he was arrested for kidnap, rape, and murder of a girl just about my age. Edit. I believe he learned my name by my mom talking to me. Edit. He had abducted and harmed the other girl a little over a week before me. He took her in plain view of a security camera and left her body in the motel room he rented under his real name. My police report aided in his quick arrest. Hence, the reason he was arrested 2 days later. I was leaving the school I teach late at night. It was already dark. I was making a left turn at the green light onto the main road to go home. I saw a car coming from the left that for some reason seemed off, just a random gut feeling, so I decided to wait before turning. The car ran the red light and hit its brakes going through the intersection. It came to a screeching halt at the other end, driving right through where my body would have been if I had tried driving through that intersection. This has happened twice in the 5-ish years I've been here. Always be cautious when you're driving. Was a weekend at my dad's and we were on our way back after getting groceries. We would always bring the shopping cart with me at the back pushing the cart and my dad at the front pulling the cart. We had to cross the road using a zebra crossing and most cars stop for you. This one car just gave me a feeling that she didn't see us. I started pulling the cart to force my dad to slow down. The car raced by, not slowing down one bit and nearly hitting my dad. My brother and I were staying at my aunt's and cousin's house for a few days one summer when I was 15. I was reading a book in my younger cousin's bed. Everyone was in the backyard mucking around. My uncle appears in the doorway, eyeing me. He just had a weird look on his face, my guts crumpled. I couldn't believe what my subconscious concluded. He's going to touch me? What? That can't be right. I had nothing to make him go away except I was reading a giant novel. I started babbling about the book, asking if he'd read it, saying it was very interesting. Trying to make him think I was talkative and not a good target, I guess. He nodded and wandered off again. I forgot about it for 3 years until an odd phone call from my mother, asking if my uncle had ever been inappropriate. I'm like, no, why? Turns out my cousin had finally revealed he'd been molesting her the whole time, and he'd done the right thing and killed himself. In the passenger seat of my dad's car, about 16-yo, one time while he was driving and we pulled up to a red light eventually went green, but as soon as I did I said, "Dad, wait." He stopped for a split second and a car ran the red light at about 80 kilometers per hour. If Dad didn't stop we would have been T-boned on my side and both probably killed. My dad would just keep driving even if I said to stop. It was weird, he sort of panicked and hit the brakes cause I said it fairly abruptly, but when he realized it was nothing he let off again and that's when the car came past. When I was in high school I had issues with a group of guys. Anyways, I was ditching school with some girls and when I was about to cross the street to leave I had this weird gut feeling that something bad was going to happen, so I decided to go back into school. The next day I talked to some girl that knew those guys and she's like, "Hey, they were following you yesterday and were going to jump you, but then you went back to school. Sure dodged a bullet there." These guys were a lot older and I was probably going to catch a good beating. My mom asked me to drop some letters off at the post office one summer day. It was a block away from our house, so it was something to do as opposed to being lazy and laying around all day. At about 11 a.m. I got ready to walk to the post office, but something told me to just keep being lazy. Around 2 I actually went to the post office, and as I walked by one of the few houses I had to pass to get there I saw police tape all over one of the front yards. I found out from a neighbor that at 11 a guy had emerged from the house with a shotgun and cops had to come and have a good old shootout with the guy. Laziness was kind to me that day. Like 20 years ago my best friend's family went to Chincoteague Island, one of those wild horse places, during April. It was the off-season, so the little motel they were in was empty other than them and they were having a great time. My friend was like 3 or 4 and she flipped out when they got back to the motel that night and would not stop screaming that they were all gonna die. This was super out of character since she a quiet, good kid. She wasn't in school and didn't watch TV to get the idea, and as new parents, they freaked and left their vacation early. Turns out the motel was destroyed that night in a tornado, and now as an adult they always tell her to trust her gut. My wife and I were traveling by car and needed to find a place to let our dog out. I noticed a car follow us off the main road to a secluded spot. When I got out they pulled up and 2 men got out and walked towards us. I instantly felt that something was not right, so I opened the back and pulled my 130-pound lab/Great Dane out, holding him by his collar, and faced them. Our dog could put his front arms over my shoulders and I am 5 feet 11 inches. They stopped instantly and then asked me what time it was, turned around and left. I honestly felt we were going to be robbed and our dog saved us. My wife, kids, and I were visiting her family in Wisconsin. After a long day of visiting I was ready to hit the road and start heading home. Her grandma/grandpa, aunt, and nieces/nephews were all living in the same house and invited us to stay the night there and leave in the morning. I got a bad feeling about it and insisted we leave. That night the house burned down, killing 2 of my wife's nieces. One of them was around 3 years and the other was less than 1 year old. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Thank God for your intuition. It's horrifying though, that could have been your family. I was walking on a busy street in inner Marrakesh, think the setting for Aladdin, but real life, when I just stopped because something felt weird, like danger weird. Nothing was obviously happening but the vibe was off. A few seconds later, one guy pulled a knife and started trying to stab another, seemed to have personal beef, and then tried to stab any bystanders in the way or intervening. Totally crazed. I must have noticed him acting strange subconsciously. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.